Sicha in Chelek Yadalit in this week's Parsha. The Rebbe brings the Rashi, where Rashi explains all of the Yukemis in the beginning of this week's Parsha are Al Teichaches. So by V'di Zav, Rashi says, Eichicham ala Egel she'asu b'shvol reiv Zav shehaya lahem. Shenemar v'kesef herbeisi lahem v'zav asu l'ba'al. How is V'di Zav v'teichacha on the Egel? Because the Egel was made because of Di Zav, because of having too much gold. And Rashi brings, we see that in the Pasuk, v'kesef herbeisi lahem v'zav asu l'ba'al. So amongst the questions the Rebbe asks, so the Rebbe brings Rashi and Parshas Kisisa. Vayoshav Moshe el Hashem vayemer Ana chata hamazeh chata g'dela vayasu lohem elekei zav. That there Rashi says the similar teichen, that the Egel was a result of having too much gold. And Rashi says on Elekei Zav, that's why Moshe was madgish that it was Elekei Zav to bring out this defense of the Eden. Atu shegaramtelem sheshpaitelem zav v'chol chefza mayasu shelo yechtu. So both Rashis are bringing out how the Egel was a result of having too much Zav. But in our Rashi, in Parshas Devarim, Rashi has to bring a raya from a pasuk. Shenemar v'kasef herbeisel v'zav asu l'ba'al. In Parshas Kisisa, the first time Rashi says this idea on the pasuk Elekei Zav, doesn't finish the pasuk. If he needs the pasuk should be needed in Parshas Kisisa. So the teichen of the beer and Sigbeis and the Sichos, Rabbi explains there's a difference, the same idea of explaining how the Egel was made because of Reiv Zav Shehaya Lahem, but there's a difference between what that's bringing out in Parshas Kisisa and what that's bringing out in our Parsha. That in Parshas Kisisa, this idea is as a defense for the Yidden. It's not their fault because they had too much Zav. In our Parsha, it's Fakert, it's part of the Teichacha for the Yidden. And because of this, there's various differences between the Rashi. So the Rebbe first explains what's the Hechrich in Rashi and Parshas Kisisa Bechlal to say that Pshat and to say it in that Eifen that it's being said as a defense from the Hemshech HaKsuvim. It says Ona Chata Hamazeh Chata G'dela Vayasu Lahem Elekei Zav. Says the next pasuk Va'ata Im Tisa Chatasam, and therefore now you should forgive them. V'mayin Mechenin Am Yisifrecha Asher Kasefta. How is the fact that Chata Hamazeh Chata G'dela a reason for Ata and Tisa Chatasam Behemshech right after that because of that the Eibusha should forgive them? Mela Rashi says must be that in this pasuk likt epis am limut Sichos of Yidden. Therefore Rashi teaches Elekei Zav is that Ata hu shegaramta lahem sheshpaitelem reiv Zav and with the Moshe. Mashenkin in our parsha it's a teichacha. I will go to the Rebbe to explain many details. So in Ha'ara 13, the Rebbe says, L'chayra, what's the hechrich of Rashi in Pshuti Shel Mikra? That the Vayasu Lahem Elekei Zav is coming to say a defense for you. And the only defense was linked in the pasuk is Atahu shegaramtelam sheshpaitelem reiv Zav. We find another way to explain the pasuk how this is a hakdama to Va'atam Tisa Chatasam in the Gemara. In Yuma, the Peivavam Beis, and other places that the Rebbe brings at Tosefta and the Yerushalmi, the Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says that the reason why Moshe said Ana chata hamazeh chata b'deila is because the halacha is that tzarech lifrei tachata when you say vidur that b'nei zog in the chat. Meila Moshe Rabbeinu was saying that to be mefaret the chat because only when you're mefaret the chat is shaykh to get is the vidur kahalacha is shaykh to get kapara. So the Hemshech is understood like Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava also. Moshe had a reason to say this. Vu'at min ha-makir that the Vayasu Lahem Elekei Zav is a limud Sichos on Yidden. Says the Rebbe in the Ha'ara, Ki pashtus ha-Hemshech va'atem tisa loy mashma kein. Says this this svara of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava and the Gemara, Rashi doesn't want to learn like that in Pshutei Shal Mikra. In Pshutei Shal Mikra stimmt das nicht mit dem Pshat HaKsuvim. Because va'ata and tisa kalchatasam is mashma that whatever it said in the pasuk is a reason why the Eibishter should forgive them, should be meichel them. If it's just a pirut achet, the pirut achet is not a reason. Ki pirut achet is not a tam lemechilas achet. Ki im shebelav hachi yesh limcha. It's like a t'nai. Not being the mefaret achet shterts with the kapara. It stands in the way of getting mechila because you're missing in a halacha. But this is not a reason for mechila. The va'atan tisach hatasam is mashma. The pasuk before is the reason, not siba for the mechila. Ubemela yitzarach leimel l'chayler yesh davar hanesim tam shimcha. Moshe is saying va'atan tisach hatasam. There has to be a reason for the mechila in the pasuk before, not just something that's a t'nai likuva in the mechila. So the Rebbe says, even according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, he says Sarach Lifrei Tachet, is the pshat that the lack of Pirut Tachet is a meniya to the Mechila, but Pirut Tachet doesn't constitute a Siba l'Mechila. The Mela Pshutei Shal Mikra Rashi has to find some other pshat in the pasuk than what Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says, in order to find how the pasuk is a Siba l'Mechila. What's the Siba l'Mechila is what Rashi says, Ato Shagaramta. That's the ha'ara. Except that the ha'ara, there's two more words in parentheses, in Chatzai Igel. When the Rebbe says that Pirut Achet is not a Siba, is not a Tam l'Mechilas Achet, even though Rabbi Yehuda ben Rebbe says Pirut Achet al Yidei Acher. When the Pirut Achet is through someone else, then it's not a Tam l'Mechilas. Over here, the Pirut Achet was through Moshe Rabbeinu. As says the Rebbe is adding to first the Rebbe said a chiddush that the din of Pirut Achet is not a tam l'mechila, it's just taking away an obstacle to the mechila, taking away a menil to the mechila. But the Rebbe says here in the parentheses another chiddush, and even though I'm saying that Pirut Achet is not a tam l'mechila, that's when it's al yidei achet. But when it's through the person himself, then the Pirut Achet is taken not just a meniya to the mechila. It's not just taking away a meniya to the mechila, it's a tam l'mechila. Let's just take a look in the Gemara that this is coming from. This is a Gemara in Yuma of Peivav on the Beis, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. The Gemara says the two possible interpretations that we're bringing in the Sichos. The Gemara says, V'tzarech, it's a new thing, it was saying other dinim of Tshuva and Vidin. It says, V'tzarech lifrei tasachet, Shanamar ana chata ha'ama zeh chata g'deila v'yasu lem alekei zav. Divri Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. It says Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, V'tzarech lifrei tachet. From this pasuk. Rabbi Kiva argues on him, he says in the pasuk, Ashrei nisui pesha ksui chata. You're not supposed to tight chase the chet. You're behalten a chet. Asher nisui pesha ksui chata. Ela ma'al shamar Moshe v'yasol am elkei zav k'd Rabbi Yanai. Dam Rabbi Yanai amar Moshe l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ribeinu shel el-kesef v'zav sher beis am Yisrael shalmu dai garim lam sheyasol elkei zav. Then the Gemara says a new thing. So seemingly Rabbi Kiva says you're not supposed to be mefaret the chet. Says the Rebbe that even Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who says Sarich Lifrei Tachet, which is talking about Al Yidei Acher, that's not a Meniyah, he also holds of another din, that when the person himself is Mefaret Tachet, it's a Siba Limcha. Seemingly, first of all, where do we see that in the Gemara? All we see in the Gemara is Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava saying Sarich Lifrei Tachet, that he learns from the Egel, which there is Al Yidei Acher. So we see that Al Yidei Acher, he holds there's a din Sarach Lifrei Tachet, that the Rebbe says that's not a tam l'mechila. So where do we have a basis to say that there's another din of Pirut Tachet through the person himself that's a tam l'mechila? And the question is stronger. If you say it's misvara It's misvara that if the person is mefaret his own chet, that's a tam l'mechila. So if it's misvara, in that there's no difference between Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava and Rabbi Akiva. Right? Rabbi Akiva just said on this pasuk that Rabbi Moshe was mefaret, it wasn't mitzat pirut achet. So then it's going to be very difficult to the Gemara. It's going to come out a big chiddush. The Gemara seems to have a machlekes. I brought down in the Pesachim Lalacha if tzarech lefaret achet or not. Comes out that even Rabbi Akiva says tzarech lefaret ain't tzarech lefaret achet because Asher Yisrael Pesach is going to be moida that al yidei atzmei tzarech lefaret achet on vetish der monte the Gemara the zwei dinim. And that all says in these two words in the Chatzah you go. Where do we see that in the Gemara? So let's look a little closer at the Hemshech Hanyanim in the Gemara. In the Gemara is a whole sugya on Shuvah. Earlier in the Gemara there's another machlekes. So this machlekes, if tzarech lifrit achat or ain't tzarech lifrit achat, which is based on the two ways to touch up the pasuk on achata vayasel melekei, is a machlekes tanoim, right? Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava and Rabbi Akiva, machlekes tanoim. Earlier in the Gemara, earlier in the Sukha, there's a machlekes amiram. It says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Rami. Rav asked a question, a stira between two psukim. Ksiv Asher Nisui Pesha Ksui Chata. It's better to be mechasa your avedas. It's better to hide your avedas. Nish megala zayin avedas. Oksiv mechasa pshaim lo yatzliach is another pasuk that says you shouldn't be mechasa. If you're mechasa your avedas, you're not going to be matzliach. The after does megala zayin. It's a stira tzvei psukim. Says the Gemara, Rav said, Leikasha, ha bechet mefursim, ha bechet she'eni mefursim. Achet mefursim, it's mefursim already, zaydas megala. Achet she'eni mefursim is better not to be megala. Explains Rashi, bechet mefursim teiv le'she'yoy devi yispayish v'lo yichbar, bechet mefursim is better to be megala. Bechet she'eni mefursim lo yigala chete, kved Hashemu, shekol mashal v'mchet mefursim nikved, shemam better not to be megala. That's Rav. Then the Gemara says Rav Nachman argues on Rav on how to be miyashiv, the stira between the two psukim. And Rav Nachman says Rav Zutra Bar Tuvi Omer Rav Nachman Kam ba'avera shebin adam lachavera, kam ba'avera shebin adam lamakim. Says Rashi, Avera shebin adam lachavera yigala l'rabim sheyivakshim men al sheyimchale. You should tell people, Avera shebin adam lamakim, you shouldn't say. Shouldn't be. That's a machlekes amayroim. Which Averas should you be mefarsim, and which Averas do I say asher nisui pesha ksui chata, that you should hide them, and by which Averas do I say mechasep shalom leyatzliach? Fragim mefarshim after Gemara. Yeah, David and others, Chayra is a pellet. Comes out that the machlekes ameiraim is the chtali the machlekes tanaim. Rav said, "Kam bechet mefursam, kam bechet she'enim mefursam. Achet mefursam, you should be megala. Achet she'enim mefursam, you shouldn't be megala." The egel was a chet mefursam. Comes out that Rav has to hold that the egel, the chet egel, darf miyam megala zayin. Rabbi Akiva said about the chet egel, asher nisui pasha ksui chata, that you're not supposed to. Pasuk goes on the chet egel. And Moshe was just saying what he said al salim u'tzchus after shegarab talem. Kan doch Rav nicht stimmen mit Rabbi Akiva. Rav has to go like Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Rav Nachman, who said, Kam bechet shebin adam lachavere, kam bechet shebin adam lamakim. Achet shebin adam lachavere darf miyeh megala zayin. Achet shebin adam lamakim darf me nicht megala zayin. The bechet ha'egel was achet shebin adam lamakim. So he does the shtim with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who says that the tzarech lifrit achet, the Moshe saying it was going on the chet ha'egel, that he doesn't learn the pasuk asher nisui pesha ksui chata on the chet ha'egel. So he goes only like Rabbi Akiva. It's that the machlekes ameirab tali in the machlekes tanaim. Hava sagt nicht die Gemara Ketanoi, oder Lema Ketanoi, like it's the way everywhere. The Gemara brings a Machlekes Amiram, and then it brings a Machlekes Tanoim, and the Gemara Bavar nicht, as the Machlekes Amiram is a Chayre telling the Machlekes Tanoim. That's what the Mefarshim asked. And the Yadavid even brings that the Pri Chadash and Shulchan Aruch says that Rab Nachman, who says Kam Baveri Shemin Adam Lachaveri, Kam Baveri Shemin Lamakim, could fit Sai like Rabbi Ben Bava, Sai like Rabbi Kiva. And the Yadavid says it's a Pella. It doesn't still with both of them. So that's a question the Mefarshim try to answer. Comes the Rebbe with these two words, L'cheira, and for this question, first of all, and gives a whole new understanding of this whole secret. The Rebbe says first the halacha l'maisa. The Rebbe says the egel is different because it's al yidei acher. That there's a difference between al yidei acher and al yidei atzmei. First, the inyan that the Rebbe says. So first that's going to come out is that Rav is nicht with Rabbi Kiva. Rav said that a chet meforsim darf a yom megala sein. Right? Rav said a chet meforsim, you should be megala. Then if you say mechasef shom leyatzliach. Rabbi Kiva said by the chet ha'egel nish asher nisur pesach ksui chata. But this is al yidei acher. Al yidei atzmei, Rabbi Kiva will agree that you have to be megala. And what Rav is talking about is when it's al yidei atzmei. By the chet ha'egel, when it's al yidei acher, so there Rabbi Kiva says even though it's a chet before some, zakman of them asher nisur pesach ksui chata. That's the first. That's an answer. That's a technical answer, right? We have a chiluk. The chiluk is much stronger. The chiluk is, according to the Rebbe's two words al yidei acher, it's two completely different sugyas. We're talking about two different inyanim. What's the pshat in what the Rebbe says al yidei acher? L'chayra, the pshat is that if you yourself are say your own chet, that's a chiluk from the tshuva. If someone else says the chet, it's not a chiluk of the tshuva. It's a technical thing that if you don't, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, shtert us the kapar. What's the pshat in these two dinim? The pshat in these two dinim is there's two separate inyanim. There's the tenuah of tshuva. There's the fact, the feeling, the inyan of tshuva that the person is being mischaret. There's the ingredients of tshuva. Tshuva brings the mechila. The feelings of tshuva are all part. That's a reason for it to get mechila. And then there's the halacha, the rules of tshuva. Says the Rebbe, l'chayra, these two sugis, these two machlekes, and it's not just that there's a difference of payah. These are two different machlekes. The machlekes amiram is a machlekes in the inyan of tshuva. What's better for the tshuva? When we say mechasep sham leyatzliach, is the pshat vet nish matzliach sein, the tshuva vet nish arbeit. It's a fault in the tshuva. Wo steht das? Da steht in Rashi. Rashi explains the svar of chet mefursum of Rav. Why by a chet mefursum should you be megala since it's mefursum? Toiv lo sheyoyda v'yispayish v'lo yichbar bay. Because the yizbusha helps in the tshuva. Avdem zokme mechasep sharm leyatzliach in a eifin where there's no chisaron in being megala, then the gilui is good to do because it's negeya to the tshuva. Through that it'll be nisbayish. Well, is nisbayish that his tshuva is a better tshuva? Obviously that's a tam for the mechila. If about their filthy nisbayish. Rab Nachman sagt the andere chiluk, but they're talking about the inyan of tshuva. Was helft der reis in the tshuva? Comes then later in the Gemara, and the Gemara says a separate machlekes. The machlekes is in the vidui, was heist a vidui. Not mitzad tshuva, but there's a mitzvah in the Torah, sheyizvades kilo atnai in tshuva. So there's halachas of vidui. There's halachas so that it should fulfill the mitzvah of vidui as a nish. Can nicht haben kapara not because the tshuva mitzad the gavra fell, because the mitzvah of vidui, the chafetz of the vidui is nicht kedeboy. And then kriegen sich Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava mit Rabbi Kiva if tzarech lifreit achad, if there's a din in the mitzias in the chafetz of vidui that it needs pirat achad or not. Even Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava who says pirat achad erak mitzad the vidui. And this difference between the two sugyas is a davar halamid meinyana. It's muchach l'cheira in seeing the sugya. The Gemara brings two machlekes. Even naniach, we would have other chilukim that other mefarshim are going to give why each of the Amiram could say another Amrei both Tanah. But that's what the Gemara brings a machlekes. Rav and Rav Nachman to for the two psukim when you have to be mefarsim and when you don't have to be mefarsim. Right after this, the Gemara brings Tanya Rav Yosef Rav Yehuda Eimer. When could you have mechila? The first 3 times, not afterwards. Why? Because hutra leinasis lekeheter. Then the Gemara brings a braysa averish yisvad aleim yom kippur zel yisvad aleim yom kippurim acher. A machlekes, if I should say vidui next Yom Kippur on Averis that I did, do you say v'chatasi negdi summit, or it's kikelev shav al kiyeh? Averis sha'avar v'shana avar aver v'shana nasa lekeheter, and then brings this din b'tzarech lifrit acher v'chapel gadol. Even if we have a chiluk between the two machlekesim that each Ameira is saying a different path, obviously the zwei machlekesim in the Indian from pirat achad. Why does the Gemara bring between them, even if the Gemara had a reason not to say ketanoi, or not to say lema ketanoi, for was bregmen in mitte noch zwei machlekesim? Why don't we bring the behem shechacha? Explain even how each one is being meisa from both Tanam. But even if not, it's the zwei machlekesim was eine shayich zelazeh. We bregmen in mitte noch zwei breises. According to this, now that's what the Rebbe says, this chiluk al yidei acher, das heißt, that's zwei basundere inyanim. We're talking, there's 2 separate sugyas. There's a sugya of tshuva. The first machlekes is behemshich to other dinim of tshuva. The first machlekes is brought about basal le'avet dvar avera pam rishena v'nitzal imena. About other inyanim in tshuva. So behemshich to that it brings this machlekes of tshuva. Behemshich to that it brings other dinim about tshuva. About over avera pam rishena pam shnia mitzad inyan of tshuva. After tshuva, maybe the last machlekes that it brings is taka in the din of vidui. This machlekes of over avera b'yom kippur zeh, if you have to say vidui the next Yom Kippur, you can look at 2 ways. Is that a din in vidui, or is that a din in tshuva mitzad chatasi? It's a machlekes in the chatasi negdi somer in the tshuva viva. Farak upon him, for sure, now comes with tzarech lifrit achad, a separate machlekes in the chafetz of the vidui. 2 separate inyanim, and therefore the Gemara doesn't bring them next to each other. So this is how we see it's 2 sugis, right? That's likt alts in the alidei acher. Never saying alidei acher because you see in the sugya. The meila, it comes out. So we said already, you see bepashtus that Rabbi Kiva fits with Rav. Rav says achet before some you have to be mefarsim. That's mitzad the tshuva of the person. Rabbi Kiva says that Moshe Rabbeinu said the chet ha'egel. Nein, not nicht gedarf mefarsim sein. Mitzad the din of vidui, darf nicht mefarsim sein. The nafkamina between these 2 is kapashat. That the inyan in the first machlekes, that the period, the oizag in the chet is negia to the yizbayish, to the person's feeling of tshuva, that's only negia when he does it himself. If it's al yidei acher, hatas nicht to tamid the tshuva. Mashayke mitzad the chefts of the vidui. Good. So for Moshe Rabbeinu saying the vidui, let me the chayis from the pasuk the dinim from vidui. It's not mitzad the feeling, mitzad the vidui. Tzarech lifrit achad. Let me from the mother tzarech lifrit achad. Amachlekes Rabbeinu and Bava mitzad the nusach havidui. If this is mitzad nusach havidui, or it's not mitzad nusach havidui, that's there even when it's like the yach. The meila is understood according to this. Just like we see, but Pashtus Rav fits with Rabbi Kiva. Causes zwei machlekes. So it also works the other way. That Rav Nachman fits with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Rav Nachman who said that achet sheben adam lamakim darf nicht mefarsim sein. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says the Chet HaEgel, sagt man, jetzt zarech lifrit achat, und sie geht nicht auf dem der Asher Nisui Pesha Ksui Chata. Talking about two separate inyanim. Rab Nachman is talking about a pearson. Says a chet shebeinadim lamakim zal man nicht mefarsim sein. That even though mechase pshaim lo yatzliach, if someone is not mefarsim his aveira felt in sein busha, so he's missing in his tshuva, but because it's a chisaron in kveid shamayim, because people hearing about aveira, so if it's not a chet mefursam, soll man das nicht sagen berabim. Only a chet mefursam soll man sagen berabim. I'm sorry. If it's a chet shebein adam lamakim, soll man das nicht sagen berabim. Because since it's bein adam lamakim, so you don't have that extra force, so it's machriya, the fact that it takes away from kveid shamayim. Mashekein tzarech lifrit achet, and machlekes Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava has nothing to do with whether it's berabim or not. Tzarech lifrit achet is in the nusach havidui. Ken da zayin eich nicht berabim. So Rab Nachman, who says that achet shebein adam lamakim soll man nicht mefarsim sein, because if the shter to kavod shamayim could fit pashtos with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who says sarach lifrit achet afilu by the chet ha'ego by the chet shebein adam shebein adam lamakim, because this is mitzad nusach havida, and that's why it works even al yidei acher, and that's why this has nothing to do with Rabbi Nachman and Rav. And this is dafka later word that the Rebbe says al yidei acher. So with this, that's one nafkamina why Rav Nachman fits with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. And according to this beer, there's another reason l'cheira why Rav Nachman will fit with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Teis jetzt as mezach, das ist zwei besondere sugyas. And again, that's a klar ois geteicht in the ha'ara, that al yidei acher is only taking away a miniyah to the kapara. Al yidei atzmei is a davar alam in minyanei, help the kapara. Das heißt, das ist die zwei inyanim. Al yidei atzmei is the part of the tshuva. So that's a reason for the mechila. Al yidei acher is part of the nusach havidi, it's part of the halachas of what you have to do. Meile kup there is noch an afkemi. In the Gemara in Yuma, there's a Teisus Yishanim. Teisus Yishanim says, and that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says, Sarach Lifrit Hachet. So he says, because of this, they were misaken al chet shechatanu lefanecha be'enes v'ratzim v'chol chaveirav. Why are we saying the chachet, all the chachets and the aleph base? We're covering all the averas. Habimimela yitzig evandini for tzarech lifrit hachet. This is the taste Yisham. In the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, in Tafresh Zayin, Hilchas Yom Kippur, Siv Daled, he brings the halacha that aser lifrit hachet, if it's a chet shebein adam lamakim, if she'ein zeh kavod hamakim shemegal l'rabbi shechata kenegdo, if it's a chet she'ein mefursim, he passes like Rav. Vamed v'ramim b'chet she'ein mefursim, aval chet she'mefursim l'rabbi mutter l'ferti b'rabbi afilu b'kil ram. Yeah, steht doch zwei Sachen da in der Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. First of all, he's passing like Rav, but he says clearly this hagbola of Rav, that a chet she'enim mefursim zol me nicht mefaret sein, that's dafka when it's b'kil ram. The achyen chilek that I said, that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, you could still be mekayim, yeah, you could be mefaret the chet, you can't be mefarsim the chet. Zwei bazin rinyan. Says the Alter Rebbe in Sifhei, u'masha oimrim al chet, I'll say the aleph beis, a chet shechet al chet, we say, ein ze nikra peiret chatav, Hayel v'akeil oimrim b'shava ein yela k'nisach tfil. Das heißt the shlifret chata. V'fichach mutel oimrim b'kil ram. So the Teisus Yishanim said the whole reason why we say the alchat is to be yetzer the union of lifret chata. Kach oimrim. The Alter Rebbe says, brings a Ramah from the Ramah, that the alchat is a nusach hashava b'kel that heißt gar nicht peiret chata. Eichon is kain m'shnei. It's not a question. Or you could tell me that when the Alter Rebbe says that the Achet heist nicht Peiret Chatav, he means it doesn't have the chisaron of Peiret Chatav. But Avada, it has the mile of Peirit Chatav, like the Teis Rishonim says, but that's not Adechik. He says, Bistam, it's not Peirit Chatav. According to this beer, what comes out from the Rebbe Sahara, that's verstandig bepasht. This is the other second nafkamina. Legabe, the first machlekes, which is what the Alter Rebbe is speaking about in Sif Dalet. Legabe, the Pirsa machet. So then it's not called Peirit Chatav. The din of Peirit Chatav, that you're not allowed to be Peirit Berabim, das was is a stira zu Kveit Shamayim, with Alter Rebbe is up beferish. So that, it's not called Peirit Chatav. What the Teis Rishonim is talking about, and that's taka what you should do, that you're Peirit Chatav, in order to have the Nusach Havidei, so there the fact that it's a Nusach Shavel Akel stört nicht. In the Indian of being Peirit Chatav, in a way not as does help the raise the tshuva. But that takes away the meniah for the Mechila, so that's who cares that it's a Nusach HaShavet, that's doch the gear to the Chefse for the Videi. That's the gear to the Nusach HaVidei, hat doch gesagt the Nusach. So here is Takid Al-Treb says, Ein ze nikra Peirit Chatav. There's two dinim of Peirit Chatav. There's two separate halachas and two separate sugyas. And the halach of Peirit Chatav was of them kriegen sich Rab Nachman mit Rav, heißt das Tag nicht Peirit Chatav. Aber von deswegen soll sagen the Nusach. And you see, you're supposed to say the Nusach. Because mitzad the second machlekes and the Chefsa Videi, heißt das Tag Peirit Chatav. So that's going to get to this ha'ara. Just quickly, I want to ask you a question in another ha'ara. I'm going to leave you for the answer. The Rebbe brings in ha'ara so 29. So the Rebbe explains in the end of the Sikha how all of the names in Pnimis and Yadim, all of the names in Devarim are not just a Teichecha, but they're also a Limutzchos. And that's why it says Bishvul Reiv Zav, right? They're all a Limutzchos. So Ba'arava, the Rebbe says, what's the Limutzchos? Because Ba'arava means Ba'arvis Moyav. And Moyav were Prutzim Ba'arayis. Why was it called Moyav? Because she was a Prutza. She said Me'av. And that's why the Eibishter gave the punishment. How do you know that they were still Prutzim then? Because you see that they were getting a punishment for their great-great-great-grandmother, that because of that the Eibishter said, Al Tiskar B'Muhammad, but Angarya Avadu, you're allowed to be Mitzayir them. And we know that Peked Avein Avis Albanim is only when they're Eichs and Maisi Aviseyim. So it must be that if they're getting punished, the B'nai Moyav, with being Mitzayir them, because their great-great-grandmother had to use the word Meyav, because they still had pizzas. Says the Rebbe in Hara 29, what's the raya? Maybe they're not getting punished b'chlal. Maybe it's fakir. By Amoin got a reward. Since their great-grandmother said, a ben Ami, and Ziyat Gizak Dalosh and Sneeze, they got a reward that the Eibishter said, Al Tiskar Bam Klal. Masheke Moyav didn't get a reward. So then it has nothing to do with Peked Avein Avis. There's no hechrich that Eichs and Mais Aviseyim. Said the Rebbe in Hara 29. Av Shalachayra Yishrema. שאין בזה עונש כי מלכתחילה לא ינסר על הכיבוש עצם, אלא של העמים נושא שכר שלא להזכר בם. Amin got a schar, Moyav didn't get a schar, but they're not getting a punishment. The Rebbe says, Ein zu das Rashi. Shemayrech u'mefaret u'b'moyav lo hizer, ela shelo yilocher b'hem, aval etzayre hiter lo. You see by Moyav that it was a special heter, l'tzarei, must be that by Moyav it was a einish, not by Amin it was a schar. So, how does this fit with the Pashtus Lashon HaGemara and Lashon of Rashi? Gemara says, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mikapeach schar kol beria, because Amin, Shatzira, they called it Amin ben Ami, because of that. Not only that, the Rashi in this week's Parsha, we just had in Chitas, it says Kibla Schar, that the Eibishter said, Al Tizkar Bam Klal. All the places it says the Lashon Schar. Taka, it says Hitter. Why is this Hitter a stronger raya than the Lashon that says that Amin got a Schar? Okay, you look it up. Look up the Sugya, see if you can see why other Hechreichim from the Sugya to this Pshat.